Come and join me as I finish up the Old West Barbershop. First, I'm going to create a 2-seat bench that will act as a waiting area. This will be my first attempt at making a bench like this. The legs are made exactly like the legs in my spindle legs for a table video. Here is a close-up of the legs. I also needed to make some support bars for the legs as well. Here's how those look. There will be a spindle on each end. I had to carefully and slowly drill some holes where the support bars would be attached. Here's a close-up of the hole. I also had to sand the ends of the support bars to a point to make them easier to insert into the spindle legs. If you try this, make sure you have a thin layer of glue on the spindle before drilling that's dry. I even added some more glue after I drilled the hole. Before the legs dried, I slanted the legs inward. Here's a close-up of one side of the bench legs. I wanted to make sure they matched the other side, so I laid this side over the top of the first one to shape it. I created the bench seat out of layers of cardstock. I believe I did 8. It had to be thick to allow me to drill some holes deep enough for the legs. I made sure to mark how far I wanted the legs to come in. And then I made marks where I needed holes for the legs. I drilled in maybe a 1/16 of an inch, just enough to hold the leg in place. On the top side, I drilled holes for the arms of the bench. If you happen to try this, make sure your arm holes won't interfere with the leg holes. Also, if I ever make another bench, I will know now to point the tops of the spindles first, instead of trying to sand them to a point at this point. I just used Elmer's glue all to attach the legs. Just a good strong glue will work. I was looking to see if the legs needed to be straight or flared out a little, and I think flared was best. I'm pretty sure you could probably use foam board for the seat base if you didn't want to glue all those layers of cardstock together, but you would need to cover it in a layer of cardstock to strengthen it. In pictures, I always see a support bar joining the two sides, but I used a long Q-tip in that area. You'll see it later. I looked at a picture and I drew out what I thought looked like an arm, and I cut it out using my cutting machine. I glued around 4 layers together. I also created a small spindle and glued it to the armrest. Here's how that piece looks. I was trying to figure the best way to glue them to the seat and back. The seat back I created with my cutting machine, but I had thought about using rope stiffened with glue to create a curved back and then glue Q-tips or toothpicks for the spindles. For this part, I'm using Olean's Quick Grab tacky glue so that I didn't have to hold it forever. Super glue would probably work best, but I can't use super glue. I'm so pleased with how this little bench turned out. You can see that support bar that I mentioned earlier on the bottom. I painted it with a couple of thin coats of wood glue to strengthen it. I made sure to cover the spindles really well. I almost painted it a wood tone but changed my mind at the last minute and I went with black instead. The next thing my barber shop needed was some wall decor. So I created some frames and artwork using my Silhouette Studio and cut them out with my cutting machine. I decided to paint the frames black for contrast. I glued in my vintage-looking prints I created to finish them off. Of course, I needed to have some scissors, so using a real pair of scissors as a guide, I created a pattern in Silhouette Studio and cut those with my machine. These aren't to scale, but this is the smallest that my machine would let me cut them. Instead of painting them with wood glue to strengthen them, I used a toothpick to cover them with the glue. A couple of them, I made them look like they were open partially. I sponge painted them with a silver metallic paint. I also gave them a wash of black paint. I created the comb the very same way as the scissors and glued a couple of layers together. I definitely needed a sharpening strap, so I used some cardstock covered in paper for the strap. I made 2 of them thinking that I would attach one to the barber station and one to the chair. I only ended up using one though. Then I used masking tape to create the ends of the strap. I used bent wire to create the hanging loop on the top. I was looking at vintage photos for a reference while making it, but after I was finished, I went and looked at my husband's and changed the bottom to a rounded handle shape you'll notice later. I made this brick pad for under the potbelly stove. I just used a piece of foam board and removed the paper on one side, and then I carved it to make it look like bricks. I don't plan to move it around, so I went ahead and glued it into place. And I really like the way it finishes off this little corner with the potbelly stove. I hung a couple of the paintings by the stove. I wish I had room for a place to hang hats or a hat rack. And here's that cute little bench I made earlier. I added some brown chalk pastels to make it look dusty and dirty. I really love the way this little bench turned out, and I think it goes perfectly in this barber shop. I used pictures of old newspapers and chopped them up to create my own newspapers because they needed something to read while they were waiting. If I remember, I hope to later add a little stool for getting a shoe shine. And of course, there needs to be a bucket of some firewood. I made this bucket while making my galvanized tubs video. And since they're a pretty busy barber shop, I thought I'd better make them a phone. And this phone was made using my box phone video. Here are the prices for the services, and I think they're pretty accurate too. And now the fun part, putting everything into its place. I decided to glue everything down permanently because I don't plan to ever change it. Otherwise, it would probably be a better idea to use museum wax or something similar that's not so permanent. I don't have any experience with the museum wax, but I have heard others mention how much they like it. I've always wondered though with the wax, if anybody knows, I was just wondering like if you use it to hang pictures or something, if it leaves an oil mark. I love the way my straight razors turned out. I created them just like I did the scissors and the comb, except I forgot to hit record. I really wish though that I was able to make the scissors and not so much the razor, but the scissors and the comb a little bit smaller, but this is as small as my cutting machine would let me cut them out. And here's a little shaving brush that I saved from my other video where I made the mug rack. I had a lot of fun though looking at the pictures and trying to figure out what they might have used during those times for a shave. I mean, I'm not a man, so I've never gone to have a shave, but I just thought it was really interesting. I really wanted to make some labels for these tonic bottles, but I ended up thinking they look better without it. There is even a little brush to brush off the cut hair. Here's how the sharpening strap thing turned out in the end. I added that little rounded handle at the bottom. I made a little hook for it to hang on to over here on the station. It was going to go onto the chair. That's why it's a little long, but I didn't want to cut it down, so I think it'll work out okay. I love this cobalt blue glass set. I saved one of the shaving mugs aside, and I'm glad I did. I took some glue and paper clay and mixed it together to create shaving cream. I guess that's how it might have looked. I stuck one of the extra shave brushes into it to look like someone's just getting ready to get a shave. I had a few extra things left over, and I just placed them in the drawers and let them be partially open to add some interest to the scene. I've looked at so many vintage pictures trying to put together how a barber shop would look, and I think I'm pretty happy with how everything came together. While working on it, sometimes I actually feel as though I'm walking around in some of those old vintage pictures. As always, I hope I've inspired you. Thank each and every one of you so much for watching. And I'll see you next time.